There it is. Spanish version too.
Saludos amigos, amigas de Breaking News. Beer and Coffee, estamos en un episodio más, un capítulo más. Que tal, las horas que Ramos Lugo, aquí estoy con Enrique Fernández y Arturo Ferrer. Y esta vez Arturo sí está. ¡En vivo!
We're live.
Estamos en vivo, estamos live. Aquí otro martes a las 8 de la noche, hora de Puerto Rico. Y al episodio de hoy le pusimos de nombre Having a Beer with Scott Janish. Dándonos una cerveza con Scott Janish. ¿Quién es Scott Janish? Un homebrewer, fiebre de la cerveza. Escribió este libro que se llama La Nueva IPA, pero en inglés, mira, aquí que lo tiene en inglés, The New IPA. Además de eso, es el cofundador de Sapwood Cellars Brewing Company. Demos la bienvenida a este caballero que está revolucionando el mundo de las IPA, el gran Scott Janish. How you doing, Scott? Welcome to Breaking News, Beer and Coffee. How you doing?
I'm doing great. That was impressive. Thank you.
Nice, Scott. Thank you. Thanks a ton for taking the time to be here with us.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy.
Appreciate it. So, Scott, before this has basically become like the new, like the hop Bible, the IPA Bible for home brewers, and I'm sure for a bunch of brewers in the industry. How did you get into beer in the first place? Like before all of this, before writing this amazing book?
Yeah, I guess my story is pretty similar to a lot of brewers. That I just got one of those little brewing kits, the Brooklyn Beer Kit, and just like made it. Picked a weekend and tried to follow instructions. And I remember thinking, like, when you're throwing in the grain, it was like it has to be exactly at whatever the mash temp was. And I was like, that's bull. That can't really matter, right? But it did definitely matter because that first beer I ever did was pretty cool. And I just kind of got hooked on it from there, and joined up with in the DC area. There's a DC Homebrewers Club, which is great, and that's where I met my good friend and now business partner Mike Tomsmeyer, and so I started blogging shortly after. I'm honestly inspired a lot by his blog, just to put out It started out more as like a recipe results type of thing, because I always thought it was helpful to read what other people were doing and seeing how they liked it, and especially those people that would say they didn't like things. I always thought that was just as important as whenever a blogger says every one of their recipes is amazing, you go, well, I've made some pretty bad beers, right? So.
And in case the viewers don't know who your partner is, Mike Tonsmeyer, like you mentioned, he's the mad fermentationist. Probably most homebrewers know him as So you connected with another awesome person who's also brilliant. I also love his blog and everything. It's you guys are putting out amazing information on both, and your website is a ridiculous source for fantastic information for anybody who's interested in that.
Well, that's kind of you to say, and I always like to kind of preface the whole blog and the book for a lot of ways was really just selfish on my part. I mean, that was stuff that I just really wanted to know, and it was research that I wanted to make better beer and understand the beer I was brewing, and so by really digging into especially like academic studies and then trying to sit down and write what I learned, that process really makes you learn it. And so it's all just been, helpful for me, and just putting it all out there on a blog is, you might as well. To me, it always seemed way too dry, and I don't know who would want to read that stuff, but I'm glad people are.
Oh, definitely. I mean, it's and I love how you guys you write stuff in a way that's super easy to digest, and it's obviously for beginning homebrewers, it might seem a little daunting at first, but once you start getting into the hobby, it's like, it's a great source of information. So tons of respect and
Thank you.
and thanks for writing all that.
So, Scott, how you to get in love with this style of beer called IPA?
It's kind of funny at the brewery. I get a lot of crap because it's really the only kind of beer I like to drink. The cool thing is like, when I get done brewing, I just want to have a lager. That's kind of what most brewers say. But it's like I'd rather have a really great session IPA or something that has a little more something there. I don't know. Hoppy beer has always just been, it was the style that really got me the most interested into craft beer too. At the time, it was more like, a little maltier East Coast IPA type styles, but one of those things where like really, really well balanced hoppy beer that pops. Just it almost feels like there's fruit or something in there, and it's just getting all that from just hops. I always thought was kind of fascinating, and then I did pretty much, that was my style that I tried to learn the most about, and that's what really the whole book is kind of, it's a book that's written for a lot of, there's a lot of just brewing knowledge in there, but it's all kind of with the mindset of how might this information help me make a great hoppy beer, but also just kind of understanding the results. Why are you getting haze when you do certain things? Why aren't you when you're doing other things? What hops might work better at certain times, and it's really using the science as like a guide to experimentation almost. Reading something interesting in that worked in a benchtop study, but might not translate into a huge batch at the brewery. But it's those little things that get me excited to try to improve or tweak a hoppy beer. So so I guess the answer is that it's just that was the style that got me into craft beer, and it's definitely the style that still holds my full attention.
I mean, they always say make what you like to drink, so I guess that's the best reason ever to.
And people like to buy hoppy beers too, so
that
definitely helps too.
I think the IPA, the style of the IPA it's not the only one, but it's the one that is changing the game of beer industry, because they're taking a lot of new products, new hops, new varietal of hops. Even Germany is growing another type of hops that are already have been used in centuries. It's like the IPA is I think it's the most
it's innovative.
Innovative beer right now.
They're always pushing the boundaries.
The limits. It's like I wanna do the same beer, same grain bill, same yeast, but different hops. Is another beer.
Yeah, it's completely same grain bill, same yeast, just even using hops at different times, but using the same beer. So I agree, and I think there's a reason there's such a high interest like around the world in hoppy beer, just because they especially the hazy IPAs, which kind of snuck up on a lot of people, but they're I think one of the most approachable styles. It's got like you almost have like that body and mouthfeel of like a light stout or something. That's still a piece of food thing. The bitterness is really restrained, but there's just a lot of flavor, from the hot side hopping and getting those like bright tropical or citrus zest notes from dry hopping. It's to me, if it's really balanced and done well, I think that's one of the more approachable beers for people that say they don't like beer or say they don't like IPAs. Well, but maybe they just haven't had a good hazy IPA.
Definitely,
I think the good thing of the hazy IPAs is that I think it's the first time that you are actually you're getting the flavor of the hops. It's not only the bitterness. It's like you're It's like you're getting the flavor profile of the hop.
Yeah.
West Coast is another thing. West Coast is like it's like you have the aroma, but you don't have that flavorful thing
Yeah.
about the hops.
Yeah, I agree, and then that's kind of what I kind of obsessed with the first couple of years at the brewery was how do I get that flavor into a hoppy beer or hazy beer in particular, because a lot of times if you taste your beer post fermentation right before you dry hop, it doesn't have that hop saturated flavor yet. A lot of times. But I found that certain hop varieties used in the kettle just work a lot better than others, and they just have more staying power. And there's some research that talks about Yakima Chief did some research, and they kind of dubbed these compounds they call them survivable compounds. And so there's what almost working backwards. So it's like studying which hop compounds are in a finished hoppy beer, and you're like, okay, we know these can withstand the process. Now, what hops have the highest percentage of those compounds? And so that's one area of research that actually since the book has come out. I believe that's in the new chapter that I did for the Spanish version. But that's survivable. that survivable stuff is interesting to me because it's really hops like Idaho 7 and just their Mosaic, Columbus, some of these just have more staying power and they just work better in the whirlpool and it gives you that, that hop flavor that you were just talking about, which is, I think important to go with heavy dry hopping because it's kind of that balance of hot side flavor and, fresh green hop aromatics. And so, yeah, the flavor is something I push for a lot, and like if I ever try someone else's beer, and that's usually what I'll say is consider maybe adding some more hot side hops just to push up that flavor.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people are afraid of. Obviously, you brew to whatever you like, and you're brewing to especially if you're home brewing, it's your beer. It's just, you have 5 gallons of it. You better like it. But for me, I think people are sometimes a little too afraid of the IBU number when it comes to hazy hoppy beer. But I think, chilling that whirlpool and really loading up that thing with hot side hops, especially those that are a little better at that point in the process, can really go a long ways to amping up some of those, that hop saturated flavor.
In how many languages is available the book?
It's in Portuguese now, Spanish, and just looking at a few other ones, but haven't really pulled the trigger yet on doing that. Honestly, I'm shocked that it's in. This is one of those books that I self-published. At home, I talked to the Brewers Publications, and they were interested, and then ultimately said, "Nah, I don't know. I don't know if they didn't think there was a market for it or what." But so self-published it, and I was just amazed to see anyone buying and reading it, let alone having interest in other languages. It's pretty cool. It really is.
In what year do you release it? In 18 or 19?
So let's see. I think it's been about 2 years. So yeah.
I think it was
19.
Yeah.
Right?
19. I think
Yeah.
because I got it right when it came out. I remember I pre-ordered it, and it was like, and I started reading, and I was like, damn, it's sort of the first time I read something that's like up to date with what homebrewers are looking for right now, and
very scientific.
It's like you were saying, it's got a bunch of really good like basic brewing information, but it takes you all the way to, the super like temperature, rousing methods, all this stuff that isn't really readily available, and it's sort of like everybody's hush hush, keeping it secret, and you really just give us a ton of really good information, and also from like actual breweries, like there's like real life information from brewery procedures in the book also that's super helpful.
Thank you. I'm glad you said that, and I kind of wrote it at a good time in terms of like my mindset, because I was just in the process of opening Sapwood, but I was still very much a home brewer, and so I was trying to write it to both parts of that. trying to make stuff relevant to
Right.
home brewers and maybe some of this that big breweries could look at and use as well.
Speaking of Sapwood, when did you guys first start the brewery, and how long were you a home brewer for before getting into it, professionally?
Yeah, I think so. The breweries this September, I believe, will be our third year that we've been open, and like most breweries, we were in planning for a while. It took a while to actually get our doors open, but Mike definitely had a lot more homebrew experience. I think he's been brewing for close to 15 to 20 years or something like that. I know he started. Let me think. I think he started in college. So I guess, yeah, he's definitely got some more years on me. But luckily, he pretty much every one of his beers he did, he wrote down. And so even today, when we're coming up with new recipes, a lot of times we Google ourselves and see what we thought of certain combinations or malt builds. And his site's great because he usually will say what he would have done a little differently had he, if he was going to brew it again. And so then we can kind of just incorporate that into our new results. But
it's like a very meticulous writing, because you guys put a lot of information there. I brewed this day, I brewed this ingredient, I put that, and then you showcase, didn't go well because I put in that. It's like,
Yeah, a lot
it's
of
like
details.
I have to improve in this next time. It's like something is very meticulous. That's the right thing to do. It's like there's no throwing information for nothing.
yeah,
And
it's great to write all that stuff down for us too, because like in the moment you always think you're going to remember whatever you do. And so as time passes or years pass, it's super helpful to have that. And the other good thing is we learned so much by blogging, because so many other people would interact with you through comments or on blog posts, or send you emails, and would open your eyes to new processes or ingredient stuff too. Or I tried this, it worked out really well, and then you try it as a home brewer and everyone thinks it's your idea, but it was just someone else already did something. And it's that sharing of information in the brewing world that I think is so great. The back part of the book is just, I went around to some of my favorite breweries and talk to the brewer or sometimes the owner, and they just told me everything they do, and they're like, yep, you can write it all down. We have nothing to hide. And I think it's that sort of spirit in the brewing world that's pretty unique, but also just helps everyone improve their beer and their that they're brewing at home or trying to sell. But so yeah, that's the sharing of knowledge in the brewing world is pretty unique.
Definitely a great testament to the quality of people and the willingness to share. Because I'm sure there's a lot of like really successful breweries with info in here that might have been like whatever, they're just waiting for the right person to put it in a book. So it's great that they also shared all of that. I don't think any of us said what we were drinking now.
Oh,
I don't know if you guys want to share what you're having.
What you're having, you first, Scott.
I'm having a Barrier Brewing Logan IPA. Pretty good hazy IPA. So cheers.
Cheers. Yeah, I'm glad you reminded me to pour something here.
Definitely. Can't have a good beer conversation without a decent pour.
I'm having a beer we just canned today at the brewery. It's called Full Measure. It's a collab we did with New Zealand hops and a group that they're working with called Totally Natural Solutions. And so it's an all Nelson, like 6% pale ale IPA kind of thing, and then has some of their Nelson extract that we did, that they're post fermentation extracts to just kind of boost that top note. And it's I have one that's for like flavor and one that's kind of for aroma, and so we dose those in at about 10 grams per hectoliter, I think, on top of a pretty heavy dry hop charge. So this is the most Nelson-y beer I think I've ever had.
Wow.
That sounds amazing. Nelson is always a freaking go-to.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous the aroma and the flavor you can get out of that thing.
They said that Zealand hops would supply the Nelson for us, and I was like, "You already got me. I will do
Nelson, and especially from that Nelson must have been an amazing crop.
Amazing, yeah, right.
Yeah,
It's a
absolutely.
very expensive hop, but if you want something good, yeah.
That's unfortunately the one thing I've come across and known since doing the book and being able to travel to other countries and talk about hoppy beers is how lucky we are in certain, especially in the U.S. to get easy access, and not always sometimes affordable, but it's better than paying some crazy shipping, or some people will have it shipped to Florida and have some other method to get it shipped somewhere close to them, and it's just all to make like a Citra IPA at home. So
right.
Feel pretty lucky about that now that I see what the lengths other brewers are doing around the world to try to make hoppy beer.
Yeah.
So Scott, I want to congratulate you on your recent. You had you wrote an article recently for the Master Brewers Association of the Americas, like a dry hopping guide. It was peer reviewed and published. I encourage everybody to go download it right now. It's like a 4-page PDF. Fantastic info. It's almost like a crash course of the dry hopping chapters in your book. So it's really cool.
Yeah.
How like one of the most interesting parts in the PDF was like the things that can go wrong during dry hopping. You have like a section for hop creep. There's a bunch of things. One of the things I found interesting was the increased pH, which is something that I never even thought of.
Yeah.
Can you go over like is there like a magic dry hopping schedule that you can apply to any beer and usually have it work, or is it like super?
It's like a hop creep, and the thing get that many brewers have this after flavor. It's like they call it what is the flavor? It's like I forgot, man.
Is it like a green flavor or something?
Yeah, it's a like a tiza. ¿Cómo se dice tiza?
Like a chalky.
Like a chalky flavor.
Yeah, sometimes I think a lot of that is sometimes is a lack of that hot side flavor. So you're just getting that like I call it. It is kind of chalky, but it's just like that. It's one note on the dry hop in some cases. I wish I could say there was like this magic to dry hop everything, because it really, I think it depends on so many things, like what you're after, what hops you're using, what you want to get from those hops. I mean, if you're dry hopping during active fermentation, you're going to be blowing off some compounds, maybe some more of those like spicier, woodier ones from hops. Those are called the hydrocarbons. And so you can almost alter in a way certain varieties by using them mid fermentation, but you also kind of lower their overall aroma, I think, because you're blowing out so many of those volatiles. They're interacting with yeast. Maybe they're some of those oils are being extracted but pulled out by a yeast as it flocks.
That would be the famous biotransformation.
Yeah,
everybody's been recently talking about. Since you're talking about that, what's your take on? Do you think it's is it worth it dry hopping mid fermentation to try and get some of that transformation, or is it you think it's just better to leave it all towards the end? And
I mean, if you're some of it's just practical. I mean, if you are brewing in a brewery and you're going to harvest your yeast, you're probably not going to want to throw a bunch of hops in at that point. There a lot of the biotransformation stuff isn't even happening with just typical ale strains anyways. So, I mean, the one that does happen is sort of, that conversion that's like, geraniol to beta citronellol. And so like, that's one that we know like ale strains that you're using for hoppy beers can do. But those are compounds you're probably getting that geraniol in the whirlpool. And, if you add them into mid or late fermentation, I think that still process is going to happen, but just over the course of that 2 weeks, I don't know if it matters exactly when you throw them in. But you just change other things. So generally I dry hop at pretty much everything post fermentation and a little bit cooler than fermentation actually took place, and that's just because the warmer you dry hop, the longer days you dry hop, you can start picking up other compounds that you might not be after. That's when you get some more of those green, astringent flavors, polyphenols. The myrcene content can go up, which is a very resinous thing. The longer you dry hop and warmer. And hop. You mentioned hop creep. The enzymes that are responsible for that are in the hops themselves, but they're not as active at those cooler temperatures. So that's another reason we do a lot of cooler dry hopping. So almost everything 58 degrees and under is where we are. There is some new research from omega yeast that looked at mid fermentation, early fermentation, dry hopping as it relates to haze, and that's kind of interesting to me because they found that day one dry hopping can actually help clear up your beer.
Really?
Yeah, and so the later you dry hop during active fermentation, the more stable your haze is.
Okay.
Which is interesting because I kind of theorized in the book the opposite. So I'll probably have to revise that.
Revise, yeah.
That's also the
that.
beauty of all of this, that everybody's constantly like what you're saying, putting it in practice, and everybody's got, and even in the book there's so many, like if you read the different breweries, what their scheduling, their setup is. You guys do it at maybe you do it at 56, 58. There's another brewery doing it at 66. That's everybody sort of got their own thing and pulling out certain flavors that they want and whatever.
Yeah, that's
incredibly interesting.
Yeah, and that's kind of the fun part about when breweries are open about their process, because then you can actually go taste their beers and think about, is there something in their process that you're not getting out of the hops, and on how you're doing it. And so it's a great way to really test your what you're currently doing and see if you're getting the most out of your hops. And just because one brewery does it one way, just because like at Sapwood we do it one way, doesn't mean it's the best way, especially like if you have a centrifuge or other tools like that can completely change how you kind of approach some of this. So there's so many variables, but
yeah.
So in that information that you're giving us, what is it's not the perfect dry hop, maybe it's the perfect dry hopping schedule, and talking about time, talking about temperature. What do you think is the best option?
Right now, what I think is the best, because of course we'll learn something new tomorrow, and that might
at this moment.
Yeah, right here, tonight.
Right here, right now.
I pretty much dry hop everything, like I said, 58 degrees, or like 50, 56, 58, post fermentation, always with head pressure on the tank, so you're trying to keep those volatiles in the beer and not let
beer.
Yeah. About usually we'll dry hop and then agitate the hops once a day for about 3 days total dry hop time, and then crash out those hops and then do a second round, or the double dry hop kind of thing. So half of our addition for 3 days, and then the other half, and then drop them out. And sometimes we'll drop the temperature a couple degrees there just to help try to get some of those hops out. Dry hop again. Always dry hopping we have a dry hop doser, it's called, and so that allows us to add our hops without actually having to open our tank up. So
minimize
with the pump that recirculate
it's actually like another little vessel that sits on top of your tank, and so you yeah.
So it's good. How about the famous hop creep? Because you're telling it's like the information says like maybe 3 years ago, or maybe if you put dry hopping too cold, it's gonna get the hop creep.
Yeah.
But in your book, you're saying the contrary. It's like put it in the maybe a cold water, cold beer, is better because doesn't get the flavor, doesn't get the compounds of flavor, and the nose doesn't go into space with the with the
Thing is,
CO2.
you guys are dumping yeast before you dry hop, right?
Yep. Yeah.
So you're also, so I guess it also
So that
depends
minimize, yeah.
on the equipment that the person has. If it's a homebrewer with a bucket, then maybe maybe it's not a great idea to dry hop at 50 something degrees, I would imagine.
Yeah, I mean it all kind of depends on your process, but yeah, like you said, if as a home brewer, if I were so for example, I do a lot of like smaller test batch stuff at the brewery, but so I still have all of my homebrew gear there, but I'll just take wort from the big tanks, in separate ferments and different dry hops or what, testing out new varieties or something. I'll almost always either dry hop at the tail end of fermentation in a homebrew gear, just because if you're adding hops with a little bit of activity still going on, I think you'll purge some oxygen that gets in. And then I'll do a second dose or the whole dose of dry hops in a keg. And so I'm putting the hops in loose. I usually have a stainless steel screen that goes around the dip tube. Throw all the hops in loose. Then you can purge that keg a whole bunch with CO2, purge your lines before you transfer out of your homebrew bucket or vessel. And so that's completely changes, a lot of what I would do on that kind of scale versus, we do like to get all the yeast out. And mainly just because, you don't want any dead yeast in your beer anyways. I mean, you just don't want any of those kind of rubbery, meaty flavors to happen. And, every time we burp from the bottom of our tank, so we hook CO2 up to the cone and run like 30 PSI through it for about a minute or so once a day, just to get those hops back up in suspension. I don't want to be throwing up all that yeast every time too.
Right.
And so that's one of the main reasons we get the yeast out too.
And obviously, in a commercial situation, you guys are reusing a bunch of your yeast, which maybe a home brewer isn't doing. So it's also, you don't want all that green sludge with your yeast cake for the next couple of batches. So
yep, absolutely, yeah. But homebrewers, I think, just trying to, because I think oxygen is probably like the one thing that it hinders homebrewers the most.
Yeah.
It's just you open up your vessel and throw in hops. It's kind of like you have think about like the lid of a bucket. Like that's a bigger lid than a dry hop port on a giant.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Yeah.
So
it's like
in that tiny.
Something like this, like something.
Yeah, exactly. So I think trying to transfer and keep oxygen out is the one thing that I would focus on the most, and that's probably where I would spend money upgrading my homebrew gears to try to keep oxygen out. If hoppy beers are your thing, especially.
So you just throw the hops in the keg and you leave in there, right?
Usually.
With a screen.
Yep, there's a screen around the dip tube, and then once I'll put it under 10 psi of pressure or something. And then for those smaller batches, instead of shooting CO2 through the keg, I'll just shake the keg a little bit a couple times a day, just because it's under pressure, and so you're not worried about oxygen really
getting oxygen in there.
Yeah, and then for 3 days or so, or 2 or 3 days, and then I'll usually transfer off into another purged keg just to have cleaner beer. But I've done that at home where I just leave the kegs in the entire time cold. That seems to be fine too, but it's whatever. If doing another transfer might introduce more oxygen and cause you more problems, it's probably better just to leave it.
Don't do it.
Leave it. Yeah.
I guess it also, I mean, if you make a really damn good IPA, then you're not going to be worried about how long the hops are sitting in it, because you're probably going to drink it in a week or two. So.
It's gonna be fast.
Story of our lives.
Ole.
In the case of hop synergy, what do you think will be the perfect combination of hops that will be the perfect match of hops that can the quality between both? What would you think will be?
I mean, there's certain hops that you can just look at like the science to see that might work well, and that's like, a Southern Cross and Nelson, for example, are both high in certain compounds that play well together. The cool thing about synergy is, hop compounds like thiols or monoterpene alcohols, they can work together. So like if you have a bunch of 4-MMP from a hop into a beer, it'll increase the perception of some of these fruitier monoterpene alcohols, even though they're not in any higher concentration. But so like there's some science you can look at to try to pair hops together. But I think really what it comes down to is which ones taste the best together when they're blended.
Yeah.
And for us at the brewery, we have a cheater hop series that we number we're on now. But it's just like those cheater hops are almost they work so well together, and so that's Citra with almost anything really. I really like Galaxy Citra. That's a great combo.
Nice.
Mosaic and Simcoe are great together. But a lot of these are great on their own too, especially there's almost like this synergistic thing happening with different the same hop variety, but different hop products. So you do an all Simcoe beer, but maybe you use a little bit of Simcoe extract in the kettle, and then you dry hop with T90 Simcoe, and then half the dry hop is Simcoe Cryo. I think those kind of beers can be really, really great too.
So in the same family of
it's the same
strain or whatever,
hop
just mix the.
Yeah, exactly. Like if you smell a bag of Simcoe Cryo, it smells different than T90 bag. It's just because of the processing, there's less of that vegetal material, which could potentially not increase your pH as much too when you're dry hopping, because I think they believe that pH raise is coming from something in the green material itself. So if you're removing most of that, you might not see as high of a pH rise from dry hopping. But really, it's just they're very similar. I mean, they're the same hop, but there's similar compounds, but they're just, because of how they process those, I think they comes together really well. So we've done that with, Citra, Mosaic, and Simcoe.
It's like okay, you're using T90, the pellets in the boil and maybe in the whirlpool, and then for dry hop, you're using then the cryo hops. That doesn't have that material, that vegetal material, right?
Yep, exactly. I mean, we'll do a little bit of both too in the dry hops. So you get, you still get that T90 in there, the more, I guess, the original kind of aroma you get up from Simcoe. But cryo to me is it's punchier and sometimes can be almost more of like a
perfume.
Like a fumey, like not gasoline, but it's just like it's very
not that piney.
Very high impact. Very high impact.
Simcoe is like a piney, it's really like citrusy. So
you don't
everything cryo is like brighter, like just
it's
like
brighter,
a sharp flavor.
Yeah.
What exactly do they do to? Everybody's always talking about cryo hops, Lupomax. We know they're getting rid of vegetable matter basically, but what exactly are you aware of the process? Like, what's the
a little. I've never actually seen it done or toured the facility. That would be kind of fun to see hands on. But essentially, I think they're removing as much of that vegetal material as they can, but in a trying to keep things cold too, so you're not heating anything up during the process, which can make volatiles escape. And then they're just, it used to just be right when it came out, at least my understanding, it wasn't even pelletized. It was like a powder. So it's super soft and I kind of like that, but brewers were having a hard time getting it to go in their beer, so they dump it in at the top, and they come back the next day and it just still be sitting
This is
It's still floating.
like this meat cryo product sucks. I don't taste it at all, you know.
That's
It's
something
like
like a hop hash, right? What
Yeah,
they used
hop
to
hash.
call hop hash. That's basically the start of cryo.
It's the same.
Hop tastes like an oily. It's more oily. It's more sticky.
Yeah,
I used one hop hash. I didn't like it. The hop hash. It's like a more oily, more gummy.
And it's sort of like almost like sandy. It's like a super dry, super like crumbly textures.
Yeah, and
like
I
flour.
don't know.
Like
The
flour.
hash might be more of like what's left over after they're done pelletizing or something like that. I think it's more of like this. They're scooping out what's around.
the oils of the.
But I've used hop hash a couple times, and it just for us it's we didn't get a ton from it.
Yeah,
so
I didn't like it.
the cryo I think is a little better, and Lupomax
Yes.
is great too. And these new extracts that are coming out, hop varietal specific extracts that you can add to your beer post fermentation is interesting to me, just because some people are probably a little averse to using an extract in the beer like that, but it's a great way to add it. Like in this beer right here, it adds like a top note that's a brighter top note that you couldn't. I don't think you could. I mean, there's possible ways to maybe increase your extraction during dry hopping and stuff, but this is like putting in those compounds you want just directly. You're not waiting for them to extract and. So
is that something like incognito?
It's incognito, but you have to dose it in post fermentation, and you have to make sure that they're like emulsifier. They'll get into the liquid. So like for us, when we did it here, had it in a separate keg, and as I transferred into the bright tank, I would slowly add it in line, so it was slowly mixing with the beer as it went into a bigger tank. But that's something we just started using, and that'll be. I think it's more of it's one of those same kind of things. Like it's like a cryo T90 and a little bit of a post firm doctoring, if you will, of it, because you can taste your beer and like, oh, it's not quite where I want it, and maybe that's where those extracts can kind of get you there.
Yeah.
Especially if the hop quality isn't as good as you were hoping, or something like that.
I recently had a beer from Monkish Brewing. I don't know if you've tried any of their IPAs.
Yeah,
they're freaking amazing.
Yeah.
And they I think it was a couple of their anniversary beers. They put a product called Phantasm.
Fantastic.
I
don't know if you guys have gotten your hands on any or you've tried it, and it's supposedly something made out of like wine grapes, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, and so it's really it's like you can get kind of the tannin thing from wine grapes. I think it's from the skins.
Grape skins?
Yeah. What I'm most interested in that is it's kind of a completely separate topic, but the genetically modified or genetically engineered yeast strains that are now coming out from Berkeley yeast. California has one, and Omega is coming out with one called Cosmic Punch that I've been testing out and wrote kind of an article about it on my blog a while back. That's kind of a long read. So if you're interested in that, but those yeast strains are engineered to take genes from like a yeast, like a wine yeast, essentially, that they know that this gene is responsible for bioconverting. And so they take that gene and they insert it into like a London Ale 3, and then they overexpress it, so they turn it up. So all of a sudden, this yeast strain now has this ability to unlock bound hop compounds. And these same hop compounds are the ones you're after in wine grapes. And so these products like that you just mentioned are potentially loaded with these precursors that could be unlocked by these GM yeast strains and just create like super tropical guava, passion fruit type beers. So that's where I'm most excited to experiment with those is using them In the mash, surprisingly, is where I would probably use those powders, because they are the. There's another one too. The name escapes me. That's basically the same thing. It's the from the grape skins themselves, but adding high bound precursor compounds into your mash with all the other enzymes activity that's going on might make it even a little easier for those yeasts to unlock those thiols that you're really after. So that's for those kind of compounds, that's where I'm super interested right now, is incorporating those with genetically engineered strains.
One of the questions we had was around the book learning double IPA you guys did with Bissell Brothers, which, now that you mentioned the basically, I don't know if that's one of the GMO yeast strains basically, but it's if I'm not mistaken, it's a Belgian strain that is non-phenolic. You guys,
Yeah,
Omega did something to remove the strain's ability to produce phenols, basically. So, and I was lucky enough to try the beer. I don't know if I think Arturo tried it, and it's one
I
of the
think
most
so.
interesting beers I've had in the last year, honestly,
Yeah,
because
it's
it's like super weird. It's a double IPA with Belgian yeast, but it's really clean at the same
yeah.
time.
yeah, that was a fun one. I think you would you get bigger, more established breweries to do the crazy stuff, and then you just sit in the background and go, I don't know, man, I hope it works. But that was fun. We were leaning towards using some of these the other yeast strains that are more like bio engineered for their biotransformation abilities, but they weren't quite ready yet, and so we ended up going with it's called Sundew is the strain. And so it's a genetically engineered strain, but what they did is the gene that is responsible for creating the phenolics of during a Belgian ferment, they turn it off essentially, and so using they just turn the light switch off. So like the normal esters, the fruity esters that the strain can have a better chance of showing through because it's not competing with those phenolics. And so that's the one we went with, and I think Berkeley has a handful of other yeast strains too that aren't tailored or made for just biotransformation purposes, but more trying to get a more specific fermentation character out of a beer. And I think those kind of strains that have a potential to add a lot of yeast-derived, fruity flavors like that are great, especially for like pale ales and lower alcohol beers that are just a little harder to get a lot of flavor in anyways.
So about this new technology, what do you think will be the future trend? The future trend for IPAs? Because it's like a new technology. The next week is another thing, another thing, another thing. What do you think is the IPS is becoming a monster, right? It's like a Frankenstein.
Yeah, I mean that's a good question. I don't I'm not sure. I guess it kind of depends on what brewers are catch on to or how willing they're going to be to experiment. I really think, at least with the genetically engineered strains that can bioconvert, I think you'd be looking at potentially using a lot more hops that are like super high in these bound compounds to get fruit flavors. So using a hop like Staz in high amounts in the mash to have those styles, those grapefruit, rhubarb kind of it's the 3MH styles. What's after those. Loading up your mash with those, with wine grape skins or other fruits that also have these bound compounds. I really think there's a lot of potential in like fruit forward IPAs, or I really like wine hybrid kind of hazy IPAs. So using
I would like that.
wine grapes with especially with like a Nelson. I think there's a lot of potential there. So because to get just looking at just bioconversion, you really need two enzymes, like beta-glucosidase or beta-lyase, to free these compounds from hops. And a lot of yeast strains just don't produce them naturally during fermentation. And you can buy the enzymes directly and just add them to your beer. They're like little granules. But I just have not had the sensory impact from those direct enzymes that I've gotten in test batches with these genetically engineered strains. So I really think that that's going to be a place where I think there'll be a lot more strains coming out that can do this. And I think especially if you live in an area it's hard to get some of the Galaxy and Mosaic and those kind of hops. Really kind of unlocking some of the bound potential and the cheaper hops that you can have access to, I think would be pretty huge for brewers overseas.
And the good news the good news in this is homebrewers right now can go get, for example, the Sundew you mentioned, the strain from Omega, and I believe they have another one, Bonanza.
Yeah,
or they're both like I think that one's a Hefeweizen yeast that they remove.
Hefeweizen doesn't have the bananas.
The phenols also, or the esters, I'm not sure, but
yes, it's that. I've actually used that one too, and honestly, that one was pretty mild.
Bonanza.
Yeah, Bonanza. It was pretty mild. It didn't have a ton of that banana character. We used it in we did a milkshake kind of IPA with macadamia milk, and we used Bonanza as yeast. And, it was fun. I think just being honest, I think I got more banana flavor from pitching a Hefeweizen yeast as 5 or 10% of a yeast pitched with a London Ale 3 than I did with the Bonanza strain. So that's one of our more unique beers at the brewery is just a hazy hoppy beer that has, just like I said, 5 or 10% Hefeweizen yeast with London Ale 3 and then all cashmere. It's kind of weird, but it just works. It's this sweet kind of banana thing that's kind of like banana runts, those little candies.
Super sweet, but with the banana flavor.
Yeah, and that we've intentionally finished pretty sweet. So that final gravity is closer to 1030 than it is 10.
Wow.
Yeah.
Going back to the hops, I know there's I taste a few IPAs with this hop burn. How you can avoid this hop burn that you feel like the hop is crawling your
it's like a Freddy Krueger. It's like a Freddy Krueger. It's like a got you.
How can you avoid this?
Yeah, some of that hop burn is kind of just time, I think, too. I mean, some of that is, it's almost like if you take a sample from a tank that's being dry hopped currently, that you really get that burn, that just because
it's not good.
No,
you have the hop material.
No bueno. So how can you can avoid them? What you can do, like a home brewer can do to avoid this?
Yeah, I think giving your beer enough time is important. When we're after we dry hop and burp and then kind of let it all settle and we're ready to come off, we start lowering our temperature about 5 degrees a day, and each day dropping the hops out from the bottom of the tank, kind of encouraging everything to slide down. I think just getting the beer off the hops helps speed up that time that you don't have so much burn. Because I think sometimes when you have a lot of hop burn, if you sit on that can a week or two, it might improve a little bit, especially if you're pouring off of it.
Sometimes it's
sometimes it's too much. Maybe what's in the whirlpool you get a lot of
sometimes a year later you can feel it.
And I do think that so the hop burn, there's like a hop kind of green thing that you can get that's sort of like hop burn, but the burn is the thing that kind of sticks in your throat.
Yeah.
And then there's like this just like a green kind of aggressive thing you can get from, I think, just not enough hot side hopping with heavy dry hopping. It's replace, give and take. When you dry hop a beer, you actually pull out some of the like isomerized alpha acids that you got in from the kettle, and you replace them with other, bittering compounds and of course all the oils from the hops. And I think when there's not enough of that hot side stuff to begin with, and you just load it with hops, you just get that really green kind of just vegetal.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're burping hops. Like a
Yes.
Yeah, hop salad. Yeah.
Maybe this has something to. I mean, it's a fantastic beer. I'm not saying I love it. In this case, it's not a negative. But Jorge was talking earlier to me when he went to visit Russian River the other day.
Mm-hmm.
He tried their double dry hop Pliny, the new Pliny.
Uh-huh.
And Jorge, what did Vinny was saying? Like literally, they sent the beer to labs.
I was talking to Vinny, so he said, ask me what you having. I say I'm having the double dry hop Pliny the Elder, and he told me, well, the double dry hop Pliny the Elder is less bitter than the regular one, and I was like, what the? For me, was like what happened here? Why is less bitter? Because he also tell me that they sent the beer to the lab
To the lab.
and they found that have made less IBUs than the regular.
And the interesting thing is they might use the same amount of hot side hops for that beer that's double dry hopped.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know for sure, but it's kind of what happens in that tank when you're dry hopping.
Mm-hmm.
You're pulling out some isomerized alpha acids. The green material itself kind of absorbs them, and then you're replacing them with a hop bittering acid called humulones. And so these also can make your beer bitter, but they're about 60% as bitter as a isomerized alpha acid. So you're pulling out some bittering properties, you're replacing them with bittering compounds. Yeah, and the interesting thing is with the IBU test,
Mm-hmm.
the IBU test, it looks for the total amount of bittering compounds in the beer. It can't distinguish between which compounds those are. So, an isomerized alpha acid is more bitter than a humulone, sensory-wise. And so if it's not distinguishing how much of one or the other is in there, it's not a true measure of how bitter that beer will be. But yeah, you can definitely pull out some hot side bitterness when you do heavy dry hopping, which is kind of another reason I'm a big fan of using a lot of hops in the whirlpool, because if you're pulling some of that bitterness out, you might as well kind of load it up on the front end, both trying to get as many hop compounds, the non-bittering ones, in there as well, because you're trying to push that flavor. And so
to balance it out.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's even more true for bigger beers. So a double IPA, I think you can get away with even more hot side hopping than a lower, 5%.
Well, for me, was like
yeah.
It's crazy that you start out with the same base beer, and then by dry hopping one more than the other, you're actually lowering the total bitterness. It measured, it's not perceived bitterness. So literally, like a lab measured IBU. What you're saying, it's not necessarily a 100% thing, but it's something that you wouldn't even think would happen.
Yeah.
We got a question earlier in the comments from Jordan Williams. I don't know if we can show it on the screen here. He was asking, are you concerned about infecting the beer when dry hopping post primary fermentation? Let me show it on here. There we go.
Here we have.
Yeah, you guys is graphic. I was gonna mention when I was watching your intro, I was like, wow, this is impressive what you guys got done. There's a question on the bottom now. You're like, this is great.
Scott, we are award-winning podcast.
You're professional.
We are award-winning, so we
appreciate that.
Global number one,
That's great because I can get off topic and I can still see the question here. So,
yeah.
But yeah, I don't really worry about that. Hops, they're kind of an antibacterial thing by nature, anyways. Yeah, you can only do so much. It's not like you don't want to soak them in sanitizer or anything like that. But yeah, we just, making sure the vessel that we add the hops into, I mean, you're being careful when you open the bag that, you're cleaning, you're sanitizing the knife you use or scissors that you open your bag with, sometimes maybe spraying the outside of the bag. But for the most part, trusting that, the hops themselves are in good shape. But I guess, I should always say, like, I always smell, like, do a good smell test. That's the one thing I'm most concerned with.
Smell the hops.
Yeah, like if you bought, like, Amarillo is a perfect example of this. It's been very, very hard, I think, to get good Amarillo.
Yeah, man. I just one for one beer. It's like I don't know. It's like maybe wet
Meh.
stuff.
Like a little cheesy, Amarillo.
Meh.
Yeah.
And so that's what I'm more worried about. I smell it right away. You usually have some that pops on hand if we have to pivot and change, just because the quality of hops is you can only go so far, and and if it doesn't smell good in the bag, it's not gonna magically transform.
Yeah, it's like milk. If you open and
Trust your senses.
It's like
You smell like
trust the smell.
goat cheese. Don't go. No,
Yeah,
don't use goat cheese. No.
Yeah, I trust the smell.
Yeah, that's when you say, nope.
There's another. We just got another question in from Juan. Scott, do you always cold crash hazy IPAs? If you do, for how long usually?
Yeah, we do cold crash all of them, but we actually do what's called a soft crash first. So we soft crash our beer to about 58 degrees after
dry hopping.
Yep. And that seems to be enough to really encourage the yeast to drop out of the beer. And then if you have a conical, you can then drop them out. So we'll do that for a couple days before dry hopping. So it sits at 58 for a while and lets some yeast and whatever else might be in there settling out. Do our whole dry hopping routine and then start crashing down to 35 degrees. And then we'll leave it at 35 degrees for a few days, and that's really when you can get a lot of the hops that drop out at that point out of the tank, and that's where we carb. So a lot of our beers are actually unit tanked. So the same tank they ferment in is the same tank we carbonate and can from, so they don't even transfer and do anything else. But yeah, I think cold crashing is great just to get the hops to drop out of the beer, get yeast to drop out, just to get, because even though you're making a hazy IPA, you still want all the stuff out of the beer. Like that hop burn we were talking about, if you're getting a little hop sediment, into your final product, that beer is probably never, it's always going to have that hop burn because there's hops in the can,
It's a shame because you pour your beer, you smell it, it's heaven, and then it burn.
Freddy Krueger. No.
But basically, what you're saying is what's making the beer hazy isn't what's you don't want all that crap that's gonna make the beer. It's gonna be hazy regardless if you did it right.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the haze is coming from a variety of things. That's using malted wheat in there, some malted oats. So you got beta glucans. You're mashing a little warmer. Dextrins can lead to some haze. You're dry hopping. I think there's some research now that's looking at even like higher beta acid hops might do a little better at creating haze than others.
What kind of
fermentation can help with haze, and so none of this stuff has anything to do with hops or yeast in suspension. And so if you can cold crash and get those out, I think you'll just have a more enjoyable taste on the palate, which is really what you're after, right? You want that out of like a extremely hoppy nose, but you want it to taste like good beer still. You don't want to, you don't want to be burping hop salads up for days.
No Freddy Krueger. No Freddy Krueger.
No Freddy Krueger. So Scott, you were telling us about the kind of hops that makes the beer hazy. And which ones do you think are the most that have that component to make the beer more hazy? You know, like something.
Yeah, like Galaxy is one of those that seems to always just give off more haze. Um, mostly a lot of those cheater hops, Citra, Mosaic, those definitely give more haze.
That's the best name for an IPA, by the way, ever.
Yeah.
Cheater hops.
Cheater hops.
Everybody's thinking it, but nobody's saying it. But you guys are literally putting the name on the beer and selling it fantastically. So, props.
And honestly, it just you do a cheat or a cheater hop series, so then each time we do a different hop combination, we don't have to come up with a new beer name. You just add the number to the end. So cheater hop 2, cheater hop. Because believe it or not, it's getting hard to name beers because there's so many great breweries and they all make 100 beers a year, and there's not a lot of names left.
Is that where you think the cold IPA thing is coming from? Is it just are they just trying to sell the same thing with a different name, or is it actually?
I mean, there's probably some process tweaks to that. That's a little different than you would do a normal IPL, but it does kind of sound like a different name for an IPL.
It's a marketing thing.
Yeah, it's a marketing thing. Yeah,
it's a marketing thing.
Have you guys done any cold IPAs?
I actually just today dry hopped it's a black IPL. So it's a Citra Galaxy yeast. I used a German lager strain that was engineered to bioconvert from Omega, and use that to ferment so cold, because there's some research that suggests that the cooler fermentation temperature can help retain some of the hot side hopping that you do. So like some of the thiols and stuff that you're after might be in the beer in higher amounts with that colder ferment. Maybe it's just because it's not as aggressive, maybe, and it's not forcing as much out. It's kind of a slower, cooler, and colder things hold. Colder liquids seem to hold things in solution better. Anyways, like CO2 is a great example of that.
I mean, it makes sense for everything everybody's trying to avoid in an IPA and making an IPA. It makes sense to do everything cold. So I guess
it's like if you do an IPA with the same amount of hops with a lager strains, it's too much. It's gonna, I don't know. I brewed one once. It was too much happiness. It's too much. It was like a regular IPA. I didn't notice the lager yeast. I didn't notice the crispiness of the yeast. It's just so thick. And so hoppy. It's like a shitty IPA.
Yeah. I mean, that's why those colder ferments, and a lot of times brewers will say, the hardest beer to make is like a really clean Pilsner, or, just because there's nothing really to hide behind. There's no malt, there's no dry hopping. But that same kind of mindset is what makes me so interested in doing hoppy beers in that environment, because there is nothing to hide behind, which means you have a better chance to get those hops to show, to actually be the star of a beer like that. And for whatever reason, one of the, IPLs that we did with like Rawaka and Nelson, that beer was so potent from it was really, really hoppy. It was great, but I've never had a beer that was that like bright and fresh after like 3 months in a can.
Yeah.
So it kept
it's something to do with the lager fermentation, or if we just got lucky, or what happened there. But there's something about those the IPLs, and we used. I'm very sensitive to like that sulfury thing you can get from lagers. That's part of the reason I don't drink a lot of lagers unless they're hoppy. But there's a yeast strain that was kind of revived called Tum 35. I wrote a article about it later, I think last year. They basically found it frozen in a lab, and it used to be one of the more popular lager strains until it just kind of went out of use, and it has very very little sulfur production. And
Sulfur production, yeah.
Yeah, and for me that's perfect because I'm really trying to have nothing get in the way and compete with the hops. So that strain's a great one for IPLs as well, and I think that one actually is now banked in the U.S. and you can now actually get it as homebrewers too, which is kind of cool.
So Scott,
doing sort of a 180 from what we're talking about, but kind of still, because I know you guys do hoppy beers with coffee, and since the name of the show is Breaking News Beer and Coffee, we wanted to touch on the I know you wrote also an amazing guide to coffee beers. What's your I know you're a fan of regular just drinking coffee.
Yeah.
How was do you compare both worlds? Like, how did you get into trying to also make an amazing coffee beer? Especially the hoppy coffee beers is like something that you don't see every day.
Yeah. It's
kind
weird,
of a concept that you can put coffee in a pale beer in general, but
the common of flavors that I have.
We just canned an Imperial Stout today, and if I was really on top of things, I would have brought that to drink. But it was a coffee Imperial Stout, so it's like 12.5%. We barrel aged a bunch of maple syrup in a bourbon barrel and added that to it, and it's like this great sort of like breakfast stout that's super sweet. I think some of these now are finishing closer to 1050, 1045.
Oh man,
and that's that like motor oil viscosity almost.
Wow.
And also,
I love coffee beers, but one of the things that a lot of them have, not all of them, but a lot of them have, is this green pepper aroma and flavor.
Yeah,
have you guys done any testing into what causes that? Like, how could you avoid that?
Yeah, I get that a lot, and sometimes you think it's like there's like a jalapeno or something. It's like, what do you?
Right.
Yeah, like what? This is a weird kind of taste. And you can kind of smell that sometimes from just old coffee bags too. When you smell it, they sometimes, to me anyways, can get a little bit of that peppery note. But for what we've found works really well is getting coffee into the beer as soon as you can. So, when coffee beans are roasted, they off-gas CO2.
Yeah, CO2. Yeah.
And that's why those bags, of course, have the little breather hole, so the CO2 can come out of the bag, but oxygen can't get in.
Yeah.
And so what we've experimented with, and I've talked with other brewers that kind of guided us along this too, is we have coffee roasted locally, and we pick it up and put it in the beer that same day it was roasted. So it's in the beer, it's off-gassing in the beer. The coffee itself is never really exposed to oxygen in a way because it's in that off-gassing phase. So this is before you would even want to drink the coffee because
that's right.
Yeah, it's like a 5 day after they roast the coffee.
Yeah, because it can get kind of like metallic and weird if you drink coffee that was just roasted. But for us, it's just we don't get that green pepper flavor when we do that.
So for beer, it's really important, like super freshly roasted coffee.
I so, especially if it's a beer that you're going to have for a while, like an Imperial Stout with some age. I mean that green pepper thing, it doesn't play well. Soft, chocolatey, roasty base. It's just kind of more like a Mexican hot chocolate type beer than a coffee beer.
And so since you're doing that super fresh thing, you're dry beaning basically. You're not putting any cold brew coffee in the beer or any liquid.
Yeah.
I actually reached out. This is kind of fun for me. Tim Windable is somebody I've really looked up to in the coffee world. A roaster in Norway. You can order his beans; they ship them worldwide. But he was kind of one of the first ones that was doing a lot of these light roast coffees. So like the really fruity natural roast coffees is something that they were doing kind of first. And so I reached out to him when I was writing an article on coffee beers to see if he had any, as a coffee expert himself, what he thought And he thought, the dry beaning approach can give you a lot of that. It's just like dry hopping. That's where your aromatics come from.
The aroma. Mm-hmm.
But it's also kind of similar where you're not getting a lot of that true hop flavor from dry hops. It's more of just an aroma thing. So dry beaning might not give you as much that saturated coffee flavor. So he was kind of suggesting, I still think you can get a lot of really great coffee aroma and a little bit of flavor from just dry beaning, but it's interesting to consider trying, 20% of your coffee dosage to just coarsely grind it, and then add that during your dry beaning, just to try to get a little bit more of that extraction, so that cold brew kind of effect. But just with those fresh coffee beans that are just taking a portion
So
of it.
You're basically making cold brew with the beer instead of water.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the only downside is with coffee is, too much time can really
hurt. Yeah.
Yeah.
How long will be the perfect the sweet spot?
Usually about 24 hours is all.
Yeah.
Wow.
Super quick.
Yeah. And a lot of times what we'll do is, if I'm coffeeing, so for this beer, it was 20 pounds of coffee, and we did, it was a 20 barrel batch, but we filled some barrels, some wooden bourbon barrels. So like the coffee amount wasn't 20, it was probably more like 13 barrels or something, 20 pounds, which is a really heavy amount. Usually we're thinking, 2 to 4 ounces per like 5 gallon batch if you're like a home brewer, thinking about it in those amounts. But I added all the beans to like a separate vessel. So just one of our yeast brinks, so just like a big keg. Transfer coffee into that, let it sit for 24 hours, shoot it back into the tank, taste that tank, and if it needs more, I can fill that brink again with more and go back and forth that way. So that way I'm not risking over coffeeing the entire thing.
Yeah.
It's like you're infusing. You have this little coffee infuser that you can shoot in and out.
It's like a tea bag that you pull in and out.
But it's
under a tank full of coffee.
It's really purged, and you have, you're filling it with liquid. You're pushing it out with CO2, and so you can always just transfer back and forth, and you don't have to worry about oxygen or anything getting in, because I just leave it hooked up to the tank, and so then I'm extracting the coffee usually at ambient temperature, not colder, but. That's what's worked out really great for us. And when it comes to the hoppy ones, the hoppy coffee beers, that's where you want to use those I think those natural light roast coffees that already have like notes of like berries. And,
Ethiopia, Kenya. This is high altitude
plays
coffee.
with the hops better.
High altitude coffee. They have that.
And light roasting is the important part, right? With the hoppy stuff.
Yeah, I think so. It works better because you have a lot of times when I'm putting together recipes or trying to think of ideas, I'm trying to pair together light flavors. So let's say the coffee tasting notes, or it's light roast, but let's say the descriptors are very close to how you would describe Mosaic or Citra. Those might be great hops and coffee to then combine to use in like a hoppy coffee beer. But it's tricky because coffee will probably dominate and take over. But it can be more of a subtlety thing too. And honestly, I haven't thought about doing a coffee hoppy beer in a while. I'm kind of glad you brought that up, brought it on my radar again.
If you do, I'm gonna be on the lookout. For any beer mules that are willing to.
We have to go to Maryland, to Columbia, Maryland.
I have to visit. No, I've always been a fan of you and Mike, and when you guys started the brewery, I was like, damn, this is gonna be a freaking explosion of knowledge and just fantastic beers. And you guys basically you focus on hoppy and sour beers.
Yeah.
The most of the time, right? So and those two are my go-to. If I'm not having an IPA, I probably would rather go with something sour. So
yeah, you're almost exactly like me. I mean, that's we just moved into a new suite that has it's like our barrel house now. So all of the sour gear is now finally in its own its own home. So we have about like 70 or so, mostly wine barrels that are mixed firm beers that we usually sit for about a year before we actually blend them with other barrels or re-ferment on fruit, and then we bottle all those. And those are completely different thing than hoppy beers. That's why they're so great. You can sit on them forever. We just did our first 3-year blend, which was kind of cool. We actually had some 1 year, 2 and 3 year like lambic inspired barrels to blend together, and so I think those beers are fun. I think they're weird for a lot of people that aren't totally into beer and aren't going to Belgium and stuff. That's a different thing for them, but a lot of wine drinkers can really get into those kind of beers too. There's a lot of similar flavors, especially if you're a natural wine drinker. There's some wines that are very, very much like sour beers, but I'm kind of like you. Something hoppy or a fun ferment bottle is kind of where I like to go.
I was in Napa this past weekend, but I have to say something. Beer number one. Okay.
Beer is king. Beer is king.
Right.
Yeah. God,
It tastes the same. I don't know.
About Sabbath, do you expect to get? It's like expanding the capacity of the brew house. How many barrels do you guys have already?
Yeah, we have a 10-barrel brew house, and most of our batches are 20 barrels. So we brew twice in one day to fill it. So we have 4 20-barrel fermenters, 2 10s, and 1 15 that we kind of use the 15-barrel as a brew a lot of like sour base beers in that one. So yeah, I mean, it's pretty small, considering, but that's really allowed us to. We added 3 new 20-barrel fermenters during COVID, which was
wow.
We're very lucky to be able to kind of expand during a time like that. But it was just the amount of beer that you need to be able to brew to start canning.
Yeah.
It goes up. So that's a lot of our double IPAs and IPAs are 20, almost always 20-barrel batches, and we use our 10-barrel fermenters as more of a. So we'll buy like 1 yeast pitch. I like RVA Manchester Ale is one of my favorite hoppy strains to use. So we'll buy 1 10-barrel pitch. I'll make a 10-barrel pale ale. Then we harvest the beer from that to do about 2 or 3 double IPAs, 20-barrel batches, and so that's kind of how we approach it. We use our smaller tanks as more experimental, weird stuff that might not work, and then also to build up yeast for the IPAs that we have a little more confidence in, and we don't.
That's awesome. You basically use a pale ale as your starter for all of the big stuff.
Yeah, that's exactly what we do.
That's awesome. And you're probably getting a damn good pale ale out of it. So
yeah,
great use of
exactly.
So, what are the future plans for Scott Janish?
That's a good question, man. I don't know.
We should do. I would love to do another episode, but focused on sour beers. I mean, that would be freaking amazing.
Yeah,
that would be fun. I mean, that's something I've learned, a whole lot from Mike on, obviously, since he wrote the book American Sour Beers, which is a lot of people's Bible, if you will, for
the Bible for sours. Yeah,
I have that one too.
Mike is amazing, and he just retains an unbelievable amount of information that I usually just ask him questions, and he's like, "It's in the book." It's like, I don't know, I haven't memorized it. But those beers are so fun because they're so unpredictable, and you have to be able to be very, very honest with yourself and know, this barrel we're going to have to dump this one or dump that one, or, this one is great, but it's just, it's not very acidic. Maybe we add a fruit that can bring some acid, or blend it with a barrel over here that has more acid. But then you have to start looking at, which microbes are in both of those barrels, what are the final gravities of those, because you can't blend, a beer that's 3 gravity points apart, because those microbes from the other will start going to work on the other barrel that you blend. And so you really kind of have to be patient and look at beers from a lot of angles, and not only from just which ones smell and taste the best for blending, but which ones can actually be blended without bottles blowing up on people. So it's there's a lot to them, but
that's a lot of scientific things.
It's a long-term deal.
Yeah.
Versus a hazy IPA that you're gonna consume in a week or two.
Yeah.
I guess it's like a whole nother. You got to think about it in a whole different way. So that's.
I think a lot of brewers will say that like their hoppy beers help keep the lights on, and the sour beers are the ones that get some of their get them excited. It's because it's just, think about opening a brewery and like going to a bank and saying, I'm going to only do sour beers and probably won't have a beer even ready for a year. Like, who's going to lend you money?
Yeah, we know. Yeah,
but for us, it works great, and I think those even combining, dry hopping some of those barrel aged beers can be pretty awesome too. So in fact, today we just had we opened a bottle of a beer that we did. That's it's half barrel aged pale sour, half like mixed firm stainless steel beer, and then all mosaic cryo dry hopped. And it's great. I love the kind of combination of, because in that case we have one pale barrel that's just is way too woody on its own. It just picked up way too much of that it's just like a wet wood kind of thing you can get there. It's just too strong. So you blend that in with a saison base that's not wooded. It kind of cuts that down a little, and just thrown in mosaic cryo is just why not?
Why not? Experimenting, that's the thing.
So, any future books from you, Scott?
I don't know. We've been looking at some point. Honestly, there's been a lot of new research just in that I feel like I could update the current one already. That might be something I look at, or I don't know. I definitely have a lot of even article blog posts that I want to get out. It's finding time to. I found out for me to actually write posts and stuff, I have to. It's be at the combination of like something I'm interested in, time to do it, and then the time I actually have to do it. I have to be like super motivated to do it. So once all those things kind of happen, then I'll write some stuff. But I think I'm definitely going to write some more articles on the genetically engineered stuff, just because that's where my head is at the moment, and that's where a lot of the experiments I've been doing are focused. And honestly, I've just been pretty amazed by how much the aromatic impact of these strains can be, which is what you're after when you experiment. A lot of times it's side by side. Can you really tell that whatever you did it make a difference? And I think it's pretty clear with some of these strains that they do have a pretty big impact.
Yeah.
So that's probably where I'll be looking at writing some more stuff. But I'm always still, I subscribe to all the brewing journals, and I'm still always reading those. And whenever someone comes out with a new hoppy, academic paper, and I get excited to if I get excited to write about it and tell everyone, that's usually what the stuff I think people are going to want to know. And that's
the new varieties of hops that are it's like every farmer is like I have to do the new.
There's always something new.
Yeah, I have to do the new variety hop that everyone wants. I want the new Citra. I want the new Nelson. I want the new.
And the good thing about doing it in like a blog format online is that you can get that info to people super quick, right away.
Mm-hmm.
Books are amazing, but I know they take time, and the editing and all. There's a lot of stuff involved.
Yeah, exactly.
So I can understand why your Instagram page, like everybody, please follow Scott Janish on Instagram. So you get amazing info every day and stuff like super quick. So
too much information. It's like you have to.
No, that's how I feel sometimes too.
I saw you in, I think it was in San Salvador, right?
Yeah.
I saw you. I saw you in a picture with Jaime Surunga, our friend from Costa Rica.
Yes. All right.
Really nice guy from Costa Rica.
Right. He told me he was on the show, right?
Yeah,
he was in the show.
He said he set a record for like the longest the longest interview or something.
I think
he have the record. He have the record.
Yeah.
you still got it. Yep.
What do they say? The longer it takes you to say something that you don't know what you're talking about, isn't that the rule? No, I'm giving
There's
I'm
just
giving crap.
so much information that
No,
No,
yeah.
but thanks
that's it.
again for being here.
Yeah.
You know,
Every
it's
time.
I could
It was
be
a
here
pleasure.
talking for 5 hours if
Yeah.
you let me, but we're not gonna do that. So
You're not going to give me a chance to the record? Okay, fine.
I don't even know how much the record. How long is the record?
It's like
Like,
a something.
2 hours.
did you get
and
the
something.
2 hours? Yeah, it was pretty. It
2
was
hours
pretty intense.
and 15
That's
minutes.
just,
Something
you
like
just
that.
a good
And
conversation.
he talked like maybe the 2 hours. Maybe we talked like 30 minutes.
Yeah.
Most of the
Yeah.
time it was him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's a great guest. He knows a lot about beer, and it's fun
Yeah.
judging beers from all over Central America there. Which
Yeah,
is,
he's a really nice guy. Also, he's
Yeah.
really one. So before we go now, I will change to Spanish.
Scott, don't go.
Don't go,
Yeah,
no,
yeah,
no, bro.
Yeah,
No.
at the end we'll take a screenshot. So
Before we
stick
go,
around
antes
for-
de irnos, queremos anunciar nuestro próximo live, nuestro próximo en vivo. ¿Cómo es que dice Arturo? El próximo.
¡En vivo!
El próximo en vivo, ponchame al señor director que está la información porque después se me olvida.
El director está bebiendo.
El director está durmiendo, no sé. El
Director.
mismo viene, pero el próximo invitado va a ser Francisco Ramírez de Matchef. No lo subieron.
Déjame, espérate, eso se puede subir ahora un
No,
momento.
dame un segundo, pero va a ser Francisco Ramírez, que es el cofundador, codueño de Matchef en el área de Pensilvania. Él va a ser nuestro próximo invitado. Francisco Ramírez, además de ser
Es
chef,
boricua.
es
Es boricua.
puertorriqueño y es dueño de una cervecería allá en el estado de Pensilvania.
So,
¿Sabes
bien,
qué le-
Matt Chef, ¿qué le
¿sabes?
dicen?
Sí, el Matchef.
Tú sabes que él es vecino de Rafa. De Rafa.
Rafa
de-
Mar-
Ra-
Rafa Márquez
No,
de
no,
otro,
Rafa
otro,
Guerrero.
otro.
De Rafa Guerrero.
Exacto, sí,
Allá
sí,
en
sí.
Cupey, que vive en Cupey.
Y en Cupey, pues él es, gracias a mi amigo Héctor Santiago, pues yo conocí bueno, le decimos de cariño Paquitín. Míralo ahí, mira qué tipazo. Having
está.
our beer with Francisco Ramírez. Vamos a tener una conversación con él, con Francisco Ramírez, el co-dueño de Matchef Craft Brewing, el 22 martes. Apunten la fecha. Martes 22 de junio a las 8 de la noche vamos a estar con él hablando de su cervecería, hablando de la historia de Paquitín. Francisco Ramírez, como yo siempre digo, Francisco Ramírez es una persona en la industria cervecera, de las personas más genuinas que yo conozco en la industria de cervezas artesanales.
Y
Paquitín.
Matt Chef ellos hicieron un collaboration con Ocean Lab hace unos años.
Sí,
Probablemente la vieron por ahí.
sí.
Se llamaba la Mad Labs.
Mad Labs.
Tremendo tipo, en verdad que como yo siempre digo, a Paquitín es imposible no quererlo. El tipo es mira, bello.
Nada más
Mira.
de verlo en la foto esa, te
Mira,
ya
vamos,
sabes,
pon la
un
foto,
tipo,
pon la
un tipo
foto,
cool.
pon-
Es
Ya
un
tú
tipo
quieres
cool.
chócale.
Mira qué hombre bello, eso es un
Mira.
hombre bello.
Mira.
Paquitín.
Paquitín tremendo, vuelvo y repito,
Tú me ves el paso y quieres chocar la copa con él, mira.
apunten la fecha, ya saben, 22 de junio a las 8 de la
Paquitín.
noche, vamos a estar con él, lo vamos a tener de invitado. No se lo pierdan. Pues antes de irnos, vamos para otra, señor director, otra vez. Vamos ahora que cada uno de nosotros diga. So, Scott, where they can find about your social media? Can you say about it?
Yeah, I mean, everything I write is just at yeah, there we go. On the screen. This is- you guys are pros.
There it is.
So,
Yeah, everything's just at scottjanish.com, and then that's where I'll put up new blog posts or whatever I'm up to, and so the social links are on there as well if people are into that. But,
or Instagram, Facebook, whatever.
And that website is just magnificent.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's really
Right.
full of like super awesome content. Like, don't read everything because
I
there's
appreciate
always something. There's always
Yeah.
something cool and really interesting to read about on that.
So, Arturo, ¿dónde te pueden conseguir? Cuéntame.
Bueno, a mí me puede conseguir en Facebook. Ahí está, Ariel. Ariel es el profesional aquí, papá.
Estaba medio dormido ahorita, pero
Facebook,
se levantó.
En Arturo Ferrer, Facebook, y en Instagram, Minimalist. Mira, con la X.
Kike, ¿dónde te pueden conseguir? Cuéntamelo.
Yeah. Cuando salga aquí, ya, mira, para que lo lean. Enrique Fernández, Facebook, Instagram, Henry Fdes y la esquinita Jardín Cervecero. Lamentablemente no tenemos cervezas de Subwood Cellars disponibles en Puerto Rico,
We
pero
want
pero todo lo que llega usualmente lo pueden conseguir ahí en la esquinita, así
We
que
need Subwood en Puerto Rico.
Yeah.
So, y a mí,
Ole.
a mí, vamos a ver, mira, pueden conseguir bajo en Facebook, bajo el Ramos Lugo, en Instagram, bajo Ramones Brew. Y vamos para atrás, señor director. Mira, aquí está el libro, cómprenlo, léanlo. Los fanáticos está en español.
where can they get
the
the
IPA Bible?
En portugués.
Amazon and I'm guessing every
Every bookstore, yeah.
Yep, Amazon is now actually carries the just started carrying the both versions of it, which is cool.
Awesome.
Nice.
Ya saben, lo pueden conseguir, leerlo. Tremendo invitado, Scott. Gracias. In Spanish, gracias. Thank you.
Don't go.
Don't go. Thank you for being part of our podcast today. It's our honor. It's our pleasure. It's fantastic conversation with you.
Yeah.
So now I will change again in Spanish. Pues amigos y amigas, será hasta la próxima aquí en Breaking News, Beer and Coffee. Como decía mi abuela, salud y pesetas, corillo. Gracias. ¡Ay! Llévatelo.
Salud. Cheers.